Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is August 17th, 2018. Greetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I am rebooting my circadian rhythms after a two-day Western States Arts Federation meeting in Denver. I flew out Wednesday morning and arrived back at Logan Airport past midnight last night, spending one night in our home in downtown Denver. It was sunny and dry in Denver, and I loved getting even a brief taste of mile-high life in the midst of our half-year here in Cambridge and Maine. Before leaving for Denver, I reached author Robert Dugoni for a conversation about his latest Tracy Crosswhite novel and how Thomas & Mercer, the mysteries imprint of Amazon Publishing, differs from the big five publishers who published his first few novels.
I'd say the primary difference between Thomas & Mercer and my experience with Big Five Publishing is that Thomas & Mercer never stops selling my books.
Because of my Denver trip this week, I'm going to go straight to the interview and then catch up with some of your comments. Then I hope to navigate the Tesla Model 3 to Ocean Park this afternoon, soon enough to miss the heat of the Friday afternoon rush hour. That's people leaving Boston for Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont for some cooler weather. Robert Dugoni is a graduate of Stanford, where he majored in communications and journalism while writing for the Stanford Daily. He worked briefly as a reporter at the Los Angeles Times before heading to law school at UCLA. He practiced as a trial attorney for 13 years in San Francisco before moving to Seattle with his wife, and his plan was to write novels. He is a versatile writer at home in the mystery genre as well as standalone novels. He has won numerous writing awards, and his books have sold more than 3 million copies. Bob came to my attention via an unusual recommendation from my wife Darlene, who is a voracious reader of mysteries. When she finished the fifth book in his Tracy Crosswhite series based on a detective in Seattle, she told me I had to have him on the show. That's the first time I think in 10 years she's ever made that direct request, so I jumped at the chance to schedule an interview with the crack publicity team at Amazon Publishing's Thomas & Mercer imprint. I reached Robert Dugoni by Skype on Monday, August 13th, and I began by asking him what led to the writing of his latest Tracy White Cross mystery, A Steep Price, published on June 26th.
That's kind of a funny story, the way that it came about. I flew down to the Bay Area in San Francisco to visit my mom, and I took an Uber to get to her house, and there was a young man in the car, and we started chatting. And he was looked to be of Middle Eastern descent, whatever, and he had just gotten married. And I asked if he had known his his wife for a long time, and he told me it was an arranged marriage. And so we started chatting about it a little bit, and he started telling me things. I asked him if he was terrified to marry someone he hardly knew, and he said he wasn't because his parents had been an arranged marriage, and they'd been married for over 30 years. So one thing kind of led to another. I got to my mom's office. She still works, and I found a computer and I started doing research, and I had another idea sort of already formulating for Del and Faz. I wanted the other two detectives. One of the homicide detectives I worked with talked to me a little bit about an area of Seattle where they had a lot of crime, and so I had another story going, and Del and his wife Faz are the product of a blind date. So I just sort of started meshing the two stories together, and I came up with really two storylines. I came up with a murder in an area of Seattle that Del and Faz go to investigate, and it turns out that Faz is facing the son of a man who he put in prison. And then I had the second story, which was Tracy, who was investigating the death of a young woman of East Indian descent, whose parents wanted her to submit to an arranged marriage, and she was a very sort of a more modern kid, grew up here in the United States, and didn't want to submit to it. And suddenly she disappears, and they don't know if she's just being recalcitrant or if she's being, or if something has more nefarious has happened to her. And here in Seattle, we have a lot of East Indians have come to the area to work for Microsoft. And so it was, and a lot of them, the second generation, the kids are very, very American. And so I just started thinking that it would be a nice, sort of a nice contrast, a nice conflict, both familial conflict and then a societal conflict. And I just started putting the two of them together, and it seemed to work.
So when you put those two together, I suppose there was a chance you weren't going to be able to fit them together. You entered into writing those two stories without actually knowing how you were going to tie them together in a book?
I did. I'm an organic writer. I'm not an outliner. I understand story structure, a lot better than I did 20 years ago. So I understand how a story is supposed to unfold, and I understand that when, if you have two plot lines, when one plot line sort of descends in tension, the other plot line should be ascending in tension. But part of the thrill for me in writing is the discovery process. And there are days I get done and I am like almost cheering inside because it wasn't something that I anticipated doing. It wasn't something that I saw coming, but it'll fit perfectly. And then, like all writers, there are those days where I get done and I go, okay, what the hell was I doing? But that's part of the writing process.
Now, and the series, Tracy Crosswhite Mystery Series, the first was My Sister's Grave, published November 1st, 2014. That turned out to be a very successful book, and I've heard you talk about it in other conversations. November 1st was the publication date. Did you know that day that you kind of had a tiger by the tail with that book, or how soon was it obvious that this was, in a way, going to change your life?
I knew I had a tiger by the tail, and the reason why I knew I had a tiger by the tail was that it had been put in the Kindle First program. So it was one of 4 books that Prime members could download for free the month before. And I knew that it had over 200,000 downloads.
Wow.
And so when that book hit, I think within the first day I had a couple of thousand, if not more, reviews on Amazon, and the reviews were very, very positive. Now, I didn't really know that it was going to change my life, and it very much has, until probably about 6 months into it, when I started realizing how powerful Thomas and Mercer, my publisher, is. I mean, what they are able to do for me, what they're able to do for other writers. They are committed to selling, and they know how to sell. And boy, they sold the heck out of that book, and I had a second book right away ready to go. They told me right up front, they said, you let us worry about the marketing and promotion. You just write the next book, because that's the best promotion you can do. And, I have followed their mantra since 2014. And I just finished my 10th or 11th book with them in about 4 or 5 years. And boy, they can sell the heck out of a book. They really can.
Let's give a quick summary of the books 2 through 5. That's Her Final Breath, In the Clearing, The Trapped Girl, Close to Home. What are some of the plot lines that you have in those books?
So Her Final Breath was actually a book that came out of My Sister's Grave. Originally, I had a second storyline in My Sister's Grave about a serial killer who was killing young women in Seattle. My agent was always very big on a police officer has more than one case. So let's see your police officer doing something else. But when I went and talked with Amazon the very first time, my editor there, Alan Turkis, said to me, I think you're impinging on the original plot. Let's pull that plot out. It would make a great second plot. So that's the story of the second plot. Tracy's trying to find the serial killer who's killing young women. And, of course, that's very personal to her because she lost her sister at the age of 18 to a pretty horrific killer. The third, let's see, what's the third in the series?
In the Clearing?
In the Clearing came about from a conversation I had with my agent. I was on the phone talking to her, and she told me that she was just reading about a cold case that had been solved that involved a hit and run, and how the hit and run had really changed the lives of obviously the young woman who had been killed and her family, but also the people who had been in the car who had hit it. And that was, I thought, just a great plot line for a story. And so I wrote Close to Home, set it down in an area of Washington State close to the Oregon border, small little town. I remember something that Alan Turkis had said to me about what crimes do to small towns in particular. In a big town, we have murders, and I'm not trying to in any way deminimize them. But in small town, when there's a murder, everybody knows, and it's a bad situation. So that was the third one, and then the Trapped Girl came about from a conversation I had with my homicide detectives, who are friends of mine. I had taken them out to dinner to thank them for all the help they had been giving me, and we were sort of chatting, and one of them said to me, "You know what you ought to do? You ought to put a body in a crab pot."
In a what pot?
In a crab pot.
What is a crab pot?
A crab pot is a pot that you lower down into the water with bait, and you try to catch crabs. And there are a number of different sizes of pots that you can get, including these industrial-sized crab pots, which you see on things like the Deadliest Catch, television series and things like that. And I looked at him and I thought, that is just the most horrific thing I've ever heard. Where did you come up with that? And he had a case.
Oh.
And he said that if the boyfriend had not broken, they never would have found the body. Because, what the horrific thing that happens to a body when it's put into the crab pot and is submerged is it becomes bait. And crabs and other animals and organisms feed off of it. So it can be really pretty horrific. And in the middle of writing that story, there was a story here in Washington State where a woman found a head in a crab pot.
Oh God!
And they had no idea how it had happened, how it got in there. They don't know what the situation was. So anyway, Tracy begins to try to figure out who's the woman in the crab pot. That was a really difficult story for me to write because originally I started out with an idea that I was going to write a thriller that took place up on Mount Rainier. My son had just climbed Mount Rainier that summer, and I just thought it would be a fascinating place to try to exist and try to solve a crime. But every time I talked to my homicide detectives, they'd say, "Why is she up on the mountain? Why is she up on the mountain?" And so I kind of switched and I started writing the crab pot story. And in my head, I kept having this 21-year-old young girl from Portland talking to me. And I couldn't figure out why the hell she was talking to me, but she just stayed in my head. And so finally one day I just decided whatever she was going to tell me, whatever her story was, I was going to write it. And I wrote about 75 pages of this young woman's story. And when I got done, I realized why Mount Rainier would fit into the story.
Wow.
So it was one of those books where I really had to trust my instincts. I had to trust the way that I did things. But it was also a little scary because I never knew fully if the two stories were going to meld together.
Now, and that's the Trapped Girl we've just been talking about.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. And how about Close to Home? What whole different setting there?
Yeah, Close to Home came about really because of the opioid crisis here in the Pacific Northwest and really all over the United States. And I started doing research on the opioid crisis and started finding out really some terrible things that nobody really saw forthcoming. I mean, I don't think marijuana is a gateway drug, but at the same time, when marijuana became legalized, many of the Mexican drug cartels realized that they were going to be losing their profits, and they plowed under their marijuana fields and they started planting poppies. And that's why now you can get heroin for less than a pack of cigarettes. And so I just started studying sort of that whole controversy and found a pretty good story about the opioid crisis and the heroin crisis and all those kinds of things. Plus, I had a woman in one of my writing classes who was a JAG officer here in Seattle, and I thought it would be a really cool setting to bring in JAG military law. And she was a big help to me in that book.
And a JAG officer is somebody who practices within the military legal framework?
Correct. They are lawyers within the military framework.
Yeah.
And she was a defense lawyer.
Interesting. Now, your first series, Attorney David Sloan, it looks as if You published the first of those, A Jury Master, with Hachette in 2008, and the second and third books were published in 2009, 2010 by Touchstone, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. So you had 3 books that were published by Big Five publishers before the fourth book was published by Amazon. This gives you kind of a great vantage point to compare from an author's point of view, and probably focusing on, you said Thomas and Mercer is a powerful seller. How would you contrast and compare your experience having your book sold by those 2 Big Five publishers versus your experience with Thomas and Mercer?
Sure, Hachette was really wonderful to me. They were really great people, and I really respected how they treated me. I'd say the one of the things I always tell authors now, having learned from experience, is don't underestimate loyalty. And I made that mistake. I left Hachette, and I left for $1. I left for money. And my father at the time was still alive, and he said to me, Bob, there's something to be said about loyalty. And I didn't listen to him, and I should have. And so one of the things I always tell writers is, if you find a good publisher who treats you well, then treat them well. And I'd say, for me, the publisher that has treated me the best and has been just fantastic has been Thomas and Mercer. And the difference for me, I'd say the primary difference between Thomas and Mercer and my experience with Big Five Publishing is that Thomas and Mercer never stops selling my books. When I'm with a Big Five publisher, my book will come out, and there would be publicity leading up to the book's release, and then there would be publicity for about 3 weeks after the book's release. I might or might not go on a book tour, and they might or might not assign me a specific publicist, and then that would be it. The book would go through its cycle, and if the book sold okay, well, then that was okay. With Hachette, they are still selling My Sister's Grave, and it is 4 or 5 years later.
You mean Thomas and Mercer?
Thomas and Mercer, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
With Thomas and Mercer, they are still selling My Sister's Grave in large quantities, and they're constantly asking me about programs. Would you be willing to put My Sister's Grave in a program in which there was one where anybody that downloads the app TurboTax gets a free copy of your book. There was another one where it was like your book's going to be put in, in the Hilton hotels. There's always a program, and I always say yes because they're always selling my book. And to this day, I think as of maybe a week ago, I haven't checked. I've been on vacation, but a week ago, I think My Sister's Grave was in the top 10 again, and that book was out since 2014. They are constantly selling my books. They never stop. They never give in. And when I have a new book coming out, that's another opportunity for them to go back and sell my entire backlist. I'd say that's the biggest difference for me between the two, between Thomas and Mercer and Big Five Publishing. The other thing that I always emphasize to writers is Thomas and Mercer is a Big Five publisher in every sense of the word. I have a great editor there. Tracy Doyle is a fantastic editor. My books go through a developmental edit that would rival anything anybody goes through. My developmental editor never lets me get away with anything. She is. We just got through editing a new book that'll be out next April, and it went from a 570-page novel down to about 490. When it gets done with developmental edits, it goes to copy edits, and it's copy edited. And then when we get done with all that, because I am so widely read, they have a third edit, a person that goes through and just looks for every little thing. I have a person that designs my cover. I have a person that works on me with titles. I have a person in marketing that I work with. They have everything that a Big Five publisher has. Sometimes people make the mistake. They think, well, you're published by Amazon, you're self-published. Not even close. I couldn't do 1/10 of the stuff that Thomas and Mercer does for me.
One of the other big differences that I appreciate, and people who listen to this show I know appreciate, is that Thomas and Mercer and the other Amazon publishing imprints, they price ebooks at under $5, reasonable. There's Kindle Unlimited, and a lot of that, I assume, means that compared with your publishing with Hachette and Simon & Schuster, a larger proportion of your books maybe are being read as Kindle books because the pricing is so sane.
Yeah, that's very true. A very large portion of my books are read as Kindle books, but I think here's the more important aspect of that. I get emails constantly from readers who will say things to me like, I am going through cancer treatment and I read 7 books a week, and I was so grateful that I was able to find your book for $4.99 because I can't afford to spend $25 on 10 books. I get those, Len. I get those emails all the time. I'm not exaggerating. I get probably 5 to 6, maybe 10 a month. People who will say to me, "I'm a shut-in in Kansas City, and I don't have any real outside interest except reading. And it was so nice to be able to download your book and to escape from my problems for a while." Wow. And, for an author, that's incredibly heartwarming, and it's incredibly moving to realize the power of a book. I know that some of the big 5 publishers have in the past said they don't want to devalue a book. But boy, I don't know what greater value you can get from a book than to get an email from someone that says something like that. To me, that makes it all worthwhile.
I've never heard it put that way. That's really moving. Because that's what it's about, is connecting with one reader.
It's about having your work read and appreciated. And boy, for someone to say something like that to you, I just had a new book come out with Lake Union called The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell. It's doing phenomenally well. I think it's like a 4.8 rating. And I have had emails from people saying to me, "You made me believe in God. You rekindled my faith. You made me realize that my life is extraordinary. You made me realize that everybody in this world has problems, and the life is really about how we overcome those problems." Again, I mean, you can't put a price tag on that. And people will say to me, "I've read your book. I've read that book 3 times, and I'm keeping it on my shelf, and I'll read it every year." For me, that's what it's about. It's about people connecting with your book and finding something that helps them as a person, helps them as a human being. It doesn't always happen that way, and I know that. I mean, different books react. People have different responses to different books. But as a writer, that's really what I'm trying to do.
Now, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, that's a standalone you published in April, and Lake Union is a different imprint than Thomas and Mercer. It's kind of a book clubs-oriented imprint, I think. How different is that? Is that a literary book compared with a mystery genre book, or how do you see those 2 books in the writing of them?
Yes, it's... I never wanted to use the word literary because then
nobody would read it.
Yeah, nobody would read it, and you also kind of set yourself up for someone to take some swipes at you that your vocabulary is not that broad. But it is a literary novel. It's a contemporary novel, if you want to call it that, and it's a story of a young man's life born with ocular albinism, which means he has red eyes. And his mother is very devout Catholic, and she always tells him, "You have extraordinary eyes because you're going to lead an extraordinary life." Because he was born in the 60s, so colored contact lenses did not come into vogue really until the mid to late 80s, and so it's sort of like Harry Potter, who has that lightning bolt scar on his head. It can't be avoided. He can't hide it, and so. It's really the story of him and his 2 other misfit friends, told through the perspective of Sam Hell as an adult. And when I wrote it, I was nervous about because I wrote the first draft in 5 weeks, and I finished it 10 years later.
Wow!
And I was nervous about it, but when Lake Union read it, they said, we know how to handle it. We know how to handle the fact that you're known to be a mystery thriller writer, and this is a different genre, but we can do that. We can take care of it. We can handle it. And boy, they really have. They really have.
Was there the idea of you publishing that one under a different author's name considered?
No, it never really came up because they said we can reach out to our readers first, and after we reach out to our readers, then your large mystery thriller audience will find their way to the book, because they really loved the book and they really thought the book was going to do well. But they said, let us go first to the people that read our Lake Union books, and then we'll go from there. So that book has really done well.
I saw one review of somebody who loved your mysteries and said, I'm going to read this book just because I respect this author. And they left a 5-star review and said, I love this book too, even though it is different. It sounds like that hasn't been an unusual experience.
Not yet. I think I had one or two people who were like, who don't read those kind of novels and felt like, I don't know what you want to call it, betrayed or whatever.
Bait and switch.
No, yeah. But for the most part, no. For the most part, even the people that have read my mysteries, like you just said, who say, well, I'm going to read this other book because I like this author, they have a totally different experience, but for them it's been an enjoyable experience.
What can you tell us about The Eighth Sister, a thriller? That's the one that's available for pre-order now, publication April 9th. Is that part of the Tracy Crosswhite series?
No, I'm glad you asked. That is a really cool story. I had that book sort of fall into my lap. I had a gentleman who I can't name in Seattle who really loved my books and said he had a story I might be interested in. And I don't really follow up on those very often. But I looked this guy up after a couple of emails, and he was a very legitimate businessman and yada yada yada. And anyway, we met. And the short of a long story is, back in the 1980s, he was acquitted of espionage. He was working for the CIA, and some things went sideways, and he was acquitted of espionage. So after we got through talking, I told him, I said, he didn't want me to write his story. He just thought I wrote well, and he loved the David Sloane books. And in the David Sloane books, there's a character named Charles Jenkins, who is an ex-CIA officer living on an island in the Pacific Northwest, sort of as a hermit, who's now married and has a child. And I said, but I think I would like to be able to write a story in which Charles Jenkins is the main character, and I want he'll go into Russia. He'll be called back to duty, and he'll go into Russia because Russia is very sexy right now. And he'll realize that things were not as represented to him, and he'll be running for his life. And when he finally makes it home, he'll think everything is okay. And then he tried for espionage. So anyway, I said, if you would be willing to help me with sort of some of the spy aspects and things like that. And so when I wrote the book, I was just flying through it. I thought it was the most fun I've ever had as a writer. I sort of was living by the mantra of my friend and writing guy that I teach with, named Stephen James. And what Stephen always says to me is, whatever the first choice is for the character to do next, you can't do that. You have to find something else. And so I just had a ball writing this book. And when I got done, I didn't know what I had, but I sent it off to be read by some cold readers, and then by my agents, and then by my editor. And man, they just loved that story, and I love that story. So is it a standalone story? Does David Sloane appear in it, or is it just David Sloane comes in as the lawyer to help his friend?
Yeah.
I thought it was a standalone, but when I got done, I had two former CIA officers who were helping me on the book, and then two guys that had worked in the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s, who were businessmen, And all 4 of them got to the end of that book and they said, "So you're doing a sequel?" And I said, "Am I?" And they told me what about the book they thought was going to be the next book in the series.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, when my editor read it, they loved it so much that they said, "Yeah, let's look into doing a sequel."
Huh.
So I'm probably going to do another one.
How about Tracy Crosswhite? Anything further planned in that series?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been getting a lot of emails from readers because in the book A Steep Price, there's a couple of very personal things that happen with Tracy, and a lot of readers have interpreted that to mean that's the end of the series. It doesn't. Tracy is going to go forward, and I have another idea that I'm sort of working on. I'm taking a few weeks off here. But I have another idea that's formulated in my head where she's going to go back home. She's going to go back home to Cedar Grove. For reasons that become apparent in A Steep Price, and things are going to happen back when she's home. So that's all I kind of have in my head at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there will be more.
Your plate seems pretty full.
It's what I love to do. I almost feel sort of out of water when I'm not writing. I took some time off last summer. My agents, said to me, "You have one book coming out. You have another book that's done. You have some time. Take some time." And it took me like 2 weeks to really sort of unwind and just sort of relax, because I love what I do. I always say to people, I feel very blessed. I feel extremely blessed that I get to do what I love for a living, and that's the thing that Thomas and Mercer and Lake Union have given me. They've given me the ability to do what I love to do for a living. And I've told them on many occasions, "You changed my life, and you changed the lives of my family members because of it."
Is there anything that you miss about being a trial attorney?
No.
Short answer.
No, it is a tough job, and I respect the heck out of good trial lawyers because it is a tough job. People don't realize, they see movies and read books about guys in trial, but they don't realize what it takes to get to trial and be in trial. And it is a lot of work. And boy, the guys that are really good, they are head and shoulders. They are above the others. I have tremendous respect for lawyers. It's a tough job.
Some people think writing is kind of an easy job. You just pick up a pen and a piece of paper and you go. What do you think is the most difficult part of being a writer?
Well, I'll tell you, I started writing full time. I was a writer. I wrote for the LA Times. I wrote legal briefs. I wrote all my life. I was on the Stanford Daily News Journalism program. I wrote in high school. I was on the editor-in-chief. I wrote my whole life. And I got out and I started writing in 1998, and I had 40-something rejection letters. I always tell people the hardest part of writing for me, was arrogance and not understanding the craft. Writing a novel is a craft. And if you don't understand the craft, you are going to spin your wheels and spin your wheels. It is very rare to find the person who understands not only how to tell a story, but can write. You might have somebody that can write, but they don't know how to tell a story. You might have somebody that knows how to tell a story, but can't write. And so I think the biggest thing that I always tell new writers is learn the craft. Because, one, it'll save you a lot of time, and two, you'll begin to appreciate how difficult storytelling is.
Well, and as for arrogance, it maybe helps to grow up in a large family, or what are the other ways to solve the arrogance problem?
Yeah, my brothers and sisters are not too impressed with anything I do. I'm one of 10, so they're they have some pretty remarkable lives themselves. A lot of them are doctors, surgeons, so they have those moments that we talked about earlier in our interview. They have those moments where they have people come to them to thank them for they're alive. The people who have had cancer, who my brothers have gone in and saved, and it's a whole different form of appreciation.
I have been talking with Robert Dugoni, best-selling author of the Tracy Whitecross and David Sloan series and other books. Thanks very much, Bob.
Thanks, Len. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Time now for your comments. Al Dimmitt wrote an email about the interview I did with University of Nebraska Omaha Associate Professor Jim Jones. He writes, Len, although I was out of a teaching role before the advent of tablets, e-readers, etc., I have been interested in watching developments in classroom and learning technology. I agree with Jim that physically navigating a traditional textbook, especially in a classroom setting, is much more practical than electronic forms, especially so when the forms may vary across platforms in the same classroom. For example, are we referring to the, quote, page number or non-page position number used on the Kindle? What if I'm reading on a Chromebook or other laptop? It's going to be interesting to see how educators manage the increasing availability of technology and resources that it provides. This is Al continuing. I have rather bifurcated fears. Edgy innovators see technology as a replacement for texts and other resources and jump in without assessment that is careful enough, and traditionalists resist the movement altogether. I do wonder about the rates of retention and assimilation of material acquired by electronic versus paper. I find that when reading extended technical materials, the e-reader and even the tablet is not my preferred medium. You've likely seen the recent research suggesting that note-taking by hand promotes more retention than keyboarding. I look forward to seeing similar results comparing reading methods. Thanks for hosting these conversations. Al, in an earlier message, offered these reflections on the 10th anniversary of the show. I did not get around to congratulating you on the big anniversary earlier, he writes, but certainly want to extend those good wishes and a big thanks for your commitment to such a monumental project. I can't claim to have been there from the first, but figure that I've been very regular for at least 8 of the 10 years. It has certainly become part of my ritual. I also hope you don't take seriously the suggestion that you refrain from weather forecasts, made tongue-in-cheek, I'm sure, from Mark Roberts in hot Dallas. No matter how dreadful the heat, I always look forward to hearing about Maine, Cambridge, or Denver. I also appreciate your Maine sunrise pictures on Instagram. You can see those Instagram pictures at instagram.com/Len Edgerly. And since my bed in Ocean Park looks out to the east, I get a good view of the sunset each day. I get very picky. If it doesn't paint the sky in the low tide flat complete colors, I just roll over and don't rouse myself to go take a picture and put it on Instagram. But thanks for mentioning that, Al. He continues, one of the things I find interesting was addressed by several of your correspondents last week. This is in relation to the 10th anniversary. I read most things on Kindle and increasingly use Audible. Often those formats are used jointly through WhisperSync. In fact, I find myself irritated when WhisperSync is unavailable, and I have to keep track when going back and forth. Occasionally, I end up with a paper copy also. The electronic versions are especially helpful for my aging vision, yet I still get the itch to sit down with a book, in quotes. I was especially interested to hear the relationship between genres and formats, both in individual preferences and sales numbers, to the extent those are known or shared. I'm also becoming more accustomed to ebook resources at the public library. After trying Library Access and finding it overcomplicated, I recently learned about Libby, the app from Overdrive, and have had better luck with that. The iOS app, that's iPhone, iPad, is very user-friendly and manageable. I have used it as a reader audio player and have also used it to download borrowed books from Amazon. I have found, in my library at least, that availability is sometimes limited, and you'd better be ready to drop everything when a wanted book becomes available. I am trying, however, to take better advantage of that, quote, free resource. Again, congratulations on the anniversary and best wishes in the next decade. I appreciate your insights and enjoy following your travels and insights. Take care, Al Dimmitt. Thanks very much for that, Al, and don't worry, I will keep mentioning the weather from time to time, whether fair or foul. Here's a comment from listener Roxanne, who writes, I just wanted to let you know how much I enjoy listening to your podcast. I, too, have multiple Kindles and several different Echoes. I like all of your content, and yours is one of the first podcasts I listen to each week. I think a few weeks ago you asked for ideas for new features on Kindles, and I would like to suggest a countdown timer and a cumulative timer. So many schools and reading programs require parents and kids to keep track of their reading time, and it is always a struggle to do that. I think this would be a great feature to add and maybe open up the Kindle to a new group of readers that would appreciate the feature. Roxanne. I think that's a great idea, Roxanne. I'm sure that's the case, that people are being assigned the task of reading for a certain period each day, and if that was a built-in aspect of the Kindle and the apps, that would be pretty cool. And finally, here's an email from Dan Campbell in California. Hi, Len. Just a heads up, in reading some recent Kindle discussions, folks are saying the Kindle Worlds and Scout programs are no longer. I know you tried Scout some while ago, if I remember. I did try Scout. That was Amazon's experiment in crowdsourcing the finding of books to publish. And they publish quite a number of books, but they're not accepting any more submissions for the program. There is a link where you can go and see books that were published as a result of the Scout program. And they have a lot of convenient ways to categorize it, including which books ended up being the most popular. It's another example of Amazon doing an innovation, trying it for a while, and not getting stuck with it forever. Perhaps the use of it diminished on the part of authors submitting it. In any event, there was a lot of books that were published that way that I'm sure reached audiences that they wouldn't have otherwise reached. Dan continues, since my wife and I recently moved, boxes of books are heavy. I haven't been able to listen to each TKC episode as faithfully as I want, so I don't know if you've already talked about this, meaning the Kindle Scout. Now, the Kindle Worlds, that was, I think, fan fiction, where you could write your own contribution to a series and the authors would make it possible to do that without any copyright problems. And that, again, is another experiment which has run its course. Dan says, I did listen to the anniversary show. What fun. You're right that Kindle technology is pretty much the norm for us aficionados, so transitioning to a few more author interviews works well. Trust you and Darlene and Claire are well in our new house. Janice has her own quilting room. See attached. Happiness is stitching in the ditch. Who knew? Cheerily, Dan. I recognize the photos that he included of his wife Janice in her quilting room reminded me a lot of what I live with Darlene's quilting here in Maine and Denver. There's always a lot of good fabric around and some beautiful work. She finished one of a photograph of me looking down at a sea lion in the Galapagos, which from our trip 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a stunning capturing of the moment. That's what she does when we go on these trips. She'll take photos, and then for the next several years, quilts will gradually emerge which capture the memories. And that's a pretty wonderful aspect of having a quilter as a partner, which Dan knows. That's it for this week. I don't know yet who will be joining me for the interview next week, but I have a couple of ideas that I'm pursuing. There are 13 days left for you to subscribe to the free Kindle Chronicles email newsletter before I draw a winner of an unopened Kindle Paperwhite from the list of subscribers. There are currently 463 subscribers, so that's better odds than winning your average local lottery. To subscribe, navigate to thekindlechronicles.com, and at the right side of the page, you will see a box headlined, Get Your Free Kindle Chronicles Newsletter. Just enter your first name and email address to sign up. It won't bother me if after the drawing, which I'll do on my birthday, August 30th, you can unsubscribe if you don't want to continue getting those weekly emails. These are where I just highlight that the show is up and give you some sense of what's in the week's program. If I get news sometimes from Amazon, which I do if there's a new Kindle coming out or something like that, I'll send a special mailing to the email list saying, just received this press release from Amazon. So you might be getting some Amazon information that way if you're subscribed to the mailing list. Next week, I hope to update you on Kindle Direct Publishing options. I hadn't realized until I heard from one of you that CreateSpace is being phased out, and now Kindle Direct Publishing simply offers Kindle versions and paperback versions under one umbrella. I'm going to have a chance to learn more about this. It's been a while since I've helped someone put a book together because my sister Stephanie has a very very exciting book that she's been working on for years, and we're getting into the final phases of putting it up on Amazon. So I'll be able to tell you about that process, and I hope that once it's up that that'll be the first time I'll have a chance to interview my sister on the show in the coming weeks once her book is available at Amazon. Music for my podcast is from an original Thelonius Monk composition named Well You Needn't. This version is Ra Monk by Eval Manigat on the Variations in Time, a Jazz Perspective CD by Public Transit Recording. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Cambridge, Mass. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.